One thing I want to come back is theory, evidence, and policy with like a very concrete example of connecting your own theory, right? And which is your work on child labor, right? And you've got, I think, seminal papers, kind of showing how essentially these child labor bans, if well implemented, can move you to a good equilibrium, but if not, that things could in fact get worse. And now we have evidence. So my colleague Prashant Bharadwaj, whose paper you may have seen, has now done some really careful work. It's not experimental, but it also helps answer the other question that I think the experiments are not crowding out important questions because there's enough incentive for people to do the best they can on important questions. But but his paper is kind of really quite striking, right? Because it's striking because it kind of shows that it's your second paper that was correct in terms of the empirical realities, that because the bans are not perfectly enforced and because they lead to displacement of the labor into kind of homes and other settings where the enforcement is harder, that you in fact see worsening outcomes in every dimension. The child labor in fact goes up after the ban. Household incomes and welfare goes down, and in fact the younger siblings are also adversely affected. Now, given that just the deep moral repugnance most of us would feel about the idea of child labor and kind of the very natural impulse to legislate bans, strengthen the bans, but given the theory and the evidence, how would you kind of square this together in kind of a sensible policy framework?
Yeah. This is an interesting question. As you say, I've worked extensively on this, and it is exactly over here, the morals become so strong, and it goes back to a little bit to what I was saying. At times, the hard calculation, what I was saying, farmers would not do even in their own interest. Their emotions get the better of deciding what is good for them, what is not good for them. It happens even in elite societies that there's a lot of confusion from a moral point of view. And I first got involved in this child labor debate, and the point I was making was a New York Times op-ed I wrote in 1994, arguing that all this very well-meaning activism in America that banned child labor immediately around the world, you have to be careful about this. If you ban child labor in a dreadfully poor country, you will, if you enforce it well also, you'll probably put an end to child labor, but by exacerbating child starvation. You can't go in ham-handed with a law and say that put an end to it. You have to be sensitive, and within that you have to be careful that partially done a ban can actually make it worse. Properly done also will not work in every country, but in a set of countries it can deflect you to a better equilibrium. This required a lot of work because it sort of reacts, you react against your first emotion, that there are situations where you may have to allow child labor to happen till you've got things in place. If you are not giving them food, basic wherewithal, to suddenly come in and say tomorrow the children can't work, they are going to starve. You have to get those things in place. So this is not an argument in favor of child labor, as some people made it out to be, but it's a criticism of the fact that you don't want the children to starve just because it makes you feel morally good. You have to put in place other policies before you go for that. This took me into this debate, and I wrote up this theoretical paper, and then I did a couple of them, which got a lot of attention. And what was for me very satisfying is, it was written as a theory paper. So you make some assumptions about the way the world works and feel that this thing will be right, what you're suggesting. Subsequently, there's a lot of empirical work, which tends to corroborate that you have to be careful, and then an empirical work means you have more hands-on idea of this is where it will work, this is where it won't work. Some of the axioms, which to me was just an axiom with no evidence, something which I had called the luxury axiom. Now there's a ton of evidence showing that actually for the bulk of, most of the time that axiom is right. Very, very satisfying for me, because this is one area where you see economics at its best. You're using analysis as carefully as possible in areas which are emotionally very difficult. So most people can't sort of immediately relate to that, but you gradually begin to win people over and try to persuade that you're not being mean when you're saying that hold back, rethink, and design your policies better. You're in fact concerned, and perhaps even more concerned than some people.
And that brings me in a way to my final question. This would have come earlier, but for the sequence. But I think a big part of the rights-based kind of movement is also, in some sense, the interventions of the courts, right? And the courts in India in the past decade have been particularly activist in terms of stepping into what would otherwise be policy space, and often very well-intentioned. But in many, many cases, with kind of recommendations or blanket bans or blanket stuff that to most economists, would be completely suboptimal, right? And so it just seems to me that there there is a genuine need for a tradition, kind of legal tradition of economic analysis of the law of the sort that, Posner and others have done in the US. But do you see any such movement here in India? And that seems to be like a massive lacuna, that you've got this unbelievably powerful, unelected entity with no self-corrective mechanisms, because it's not facing legislative feedback or electoral feedback, but that can go down well-intentioned but empirically misguided trajectory.
Karthik, very good question, because this is very close to my heart. Actually, right now, for me personally, law and economics is the big research agenda. I don't get too much time to do sort of closed-door research the way I would do earlier, but 2 weeks ago I was at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, gave a very early paper on how to think of law and economics properly. And I do plan, in the nooks and crannies of my administrative work, to work on this, so it's something that I have on hand as an important topic. And for India, I've for long felt it's important. In Calcutta, at the law school in Calcutta, I played a bit of a role in founding a lecture series on law and economics. This has now had about 10 years on that. A whole lot of people have spoken. And the idea was that it's very rudimentary in economics, in India, law and economics. And from a range of fields, including antitrust legislation, you have to have a deep understanding of what the law does. Because even the people who are going and enforcing these interventions, they have to have a bit of an understanding what the law does to the economy. And in India, that's really very rudimentary. This is one area where we are trailing behind the industrialized countries. Otherwise, actually, in most intellectual areas, India is pretty much on the front line. But law and economics is a field where there has to be much more. World Bank-wide, there isn't anything. I mean, people are working on that. And given that I've got very interested in it now, I will probably give it a bit of a push while I'm still there.